The dedication of the George W. Bush Presidential Center provided a striking image of 5 living U.S. presidents shoulder to shoulder for the event now 10 years past. It was also the start of the Southern Methodist University's Center for Presidential History, and Director Dr. Jeff Engel joins us this morning. Wow, what a decade it has been. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been quite the few years for presidential history, that's for sure.
Absolutely, and we're going to dive right in with you and go back in time to kind of a history-making presidency, the 2016 election of Donald Trump.
Remarkable. And, you know, one of the things that is important to note about Trump is he's different. He really breaks the mold of almost all patterns for presidents, both in terms of his own personal comportment, obviously in terms of the way he communicated with the public because of Twitter, also because of many of his policies when it came to international relations, especially, and thinking about our relations with NATO in particular these days, given the war in Ukraine. And I want to stress that when I say that Donald Trump is different, some people might hear that as an insult, but that's actually the way the president wanted it. He came in and said, I'm going to shuffle things up. I'm going to break things. I'm going to drain the swamp. He really said that I'm going to be a different kind of president. And the truth was, from a historian's perspective, he really was.
Yeah, and then a major shaping force, no doubt, of the last 2 presidencies, but also just for all of us, was the history-changing pandemic.
Yes, I mean, obviously, it hasn't happened in America for a century, as we all too sadly know now. And it really also reveals the great tension that still exists in our country between national power, local power, state power. There's a real case to be made for a national response versus a federalist response, if you will, based upon how we reacted. And I think it's one of those moments where you say, boy, you know, think how close the 2020 election was, which Joe Biden won, obviously, but how close it was. And when you factor in that we were in an extraordinary pandemic and one of the ensuing worst economic crises of the entire 20th century, it's a marvel, really, that it was that close. It tells me that absent the pandemic, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Donald Trump wins a second term.
Right, right. Yeah, and another historic event during your tenure at the Center for Presidential History, the months of violent marches and protests after the George Floyd murder, and then just a few months later, the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, you know, I'm often asked whether or not we are in the worst period of discord in American history, the worst period of violence and political violence in American history. By the way, the answer is no to that. But it's an uncomfortable question. I mean, the answer, of course, is that the 1850s leading up to the Civil War were worse, and of course the Civil War got worse. But the truth is, this is not a category that you want to compete in. So it's clear that we are in a divisive period at this moment in American history. And studying the presidents, you can really see the evolution of the way the public engages politics writ large, which is to say, I have a pet theory that essentially something changed in 1992 when Bill Clinton was elected. That is to say, presidents before then, of course, had their opponents, had their opposition, had their critics. But if Bill Clinton and then going forward, we have a new dynamic where people really seem to hate the president if they're on the other side of the aisle. Think about the arguments against Donald Trump. Think about the arguments against Joe Biden, George W. Bush, Barack Obama. There's a sense in which if people disagree with the president these days, it's not just on policy, it's a visceral hatred. And it's really hard to share a country with somebody who you hate across the aisle. And I do hope that's something that obviously all Americans want to work on going forward.
Well, you're absolutely right. It goes from hating the president if you're on whatever side to, yeah, like you said, just bleeding over to hating each other. And man, yeah, that's a huge problem. All right, we are unfortunately out of time. So you folks can find a link to SMU's Center for Presidential History and its Collective Memories Project. You can find that on our website. Director Jeff Engel, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.